I'm a corporate innovation advisor specialized on dual innovation and scaling up. Prior to getting into the consulting space, I was working for different companies and SMEs in Switzerland and Germany. So always in the fields of corporate innovation, corporate development. So that also lead me to the topic of ambidexterity as a practitioner. Last but not least, I co-wrote a book called Scaling Up Corporate Startups together with a guy named Frank Mattes. So I think we were very pioneering here. And this will also be a topic addressed in the input later on from my side. Over to Eva.
Thank you, Ralph. Hi, everyone. My name is Eva. I am with Bosch since 2014. I did my PhD in business model innovation with Bosch and then joined the corporate business model innovation department, which I will also tell you a little bit about later. I've been working there for 5 years, building up the business model innovation topic within Bosch. And I am now head of innovation and business building of our consulting business at the Bosch Engineering unit.
I want to kick off with a famous quote from a guy named Steve Blank. I guess you all know him, the godfather of lean startup and customer development movement. So, and he's claiming ambidextrous organizations were nice to have in the 20th century, but they have become essential in the 21st century. So essentially, this is a big deal as it calls companies to think about turning into ambidextrous organizations. And indeed, companies increasingly start their journey towards ambidextrous organizations, such as Bosch, and we will hear about their journey and learnings and how they put some of the measures I'm going to introduce in the following minutes, how they have put them into practice. And but it still seems that they are struggling with getting ambidexterity work in their organizations. And that was the reason why Eva and I sat together and we tried to get our head around the challenging question we would like to discuss with you today. What does it actually take to make ambidexterity, that is sustaining the core business and building the new business concurrently, work in organizations? So this is the questions. And condensing our, let's say, joint experience coming from a consulting advisory point of view, but also from a viewpoint of the corporate practitioners aiming to implement ambidexterity in a large organizations, we have come up with 3 key questions we think that need to be addressed to make ambidexterity work. Why, what, and how, in brief. So the first question is, why do we need, as a company, to become an ambidextrous organization? So you have to answer this question in order to create some awareness and legitimacy to implement ambidexterity in the broader organization. So without that point, without getting this clear, you will have a hard time to really get ambidexterity implemented in a large organization. The second question is the what. So you have to think about, what does explore actually mean to you or to your organization? What would you like to explore? What's the scope? What is your strategic intent? And how does it align to the current core business? Because explore just makes sense if it buys into the future of the current core business. So otherwise you operate in a kind of silo and you will have a hard time to get it adopted across the broader organization. So, and this is the strategy part, the what. And finally, the third question is, how do we do it? How do we organize ambidexterity in our organization? And we will see that this question very much comes down to finding a balance between separating or exploratory ventures from the core business, but at the same time also integrated with the core business to leverage the existing strength and to get it embedded as a future part of the core business. So let's start with the first 2 points, the why and the what. So the starting point here, and you could call it the rooftop, is by all means awareness. So the companies, and in particular the top management of a company, needs to be aware that ambidexterity is truly mandatory to stay future-proof. So as Steve Blanks claimed in the quote, and if you take it serious, there are a couple of let's say associated actions to go about that. The first is you need some C-level alignment, setting the stage for further implementation. So if you don't drive this from the top, it's very difficult to get it disseminated throughout the organization. The second thing is we have to define an overarching compelling vision for this dual challenge, so to speak. So if that's not in place yet, people will wonder why should I go about that. So so this is also a kind of leadership issue being driven from the top. And last but not least, the top management or the senior leadership has to shape kind of shared identity. Although you operate, let's say, in two different camps, in the explore camp and the exploit camp, all employees have to feel as one team. Yeah? They shouldn't operate in silos and against each other. And this is carried out through providing a shared identity. So, and all those actions are by and large leadership issues. And once you have tackled this, you can address the next question. So how to go about the new business strategy? And so how can you build up the new business next to the core business? So and how do both get aligned to each other? And if you have a look here on the right hand side, so I took a visual from Lead and Disrupt by O'Reilly Tashman. You may be familiar with this chart. So if you operate in existing markets and existing organizational capabilities, you are clearly in the exploit realm. Yeah, but once you reach beyond in either or both dimensions, we will get to the explore part, which let's say requires a completely different way to be operated and pursued. And key issues to address this are, first of all, the question: what do we mean by explore? Yeah, because you throw this term around, but in fact, every company needs to define what explore means to them in this particular context. What do we want to achieve? Yeah, how far are we willing to move beyond the core? What is our risk propensity? I mean, there is no right and wrong. You don't have to jump as far as possible. It just needs to match your strategy, right, for the future. An important point, as I mentioned earlier, how does Explore buy into the future of our core business in order to avoid that it just operates as a, let's say, ivory tower and has a hard time to get adopted later on. So we need to demonstrate a clear link to the core business future. And the result should be, and we will see this at Bosch, they already have this in place. The result should be some strategic search fields, or also called hunting zones. There are different terms to that. But this is a common guardrail how companies should explore in alignment with their strategy. And this is a critical requirement as well to get ambidexterity implemented. So when it comes to the how, so more to the operational part, we have to see that implementing organizational ambidexterity is largely an organizational issue. So, and it comes down to balancing separation from and integration with an established business successfully. Yeah. So on the one hand, if you have an exploratory venture or corporate startup, you would like to protect it from the core business, to let's say to keep it growing according to its strategy and not being absorbed by the existing core business. So giving it autonomy, so to speak. On the other hand, in order to be successful, you have to leverage existing assets, and you also have to connect it at some point with a business management system, with a lot of rules, with a lot of processes, etc., in order to make it a future part of the core business, so to speak. And here's where the dual innovation approach can help. So because it calls for three distinct playing fields. The first one here is about optimizing the core. It's a real exploit playing field, which deals within existing markets and capabilities. But then we turn to the explore part, and we have the create the new playing field, how we call it, and this mainly accommodates the steps discovery and validation, and this is very much about exploring, and the focus here is clearly a separation from the existing business to provide autonomy and protection to the fledgling venture, so to speak. But along the process, once you have validated the venture and you would like to further grow it, you enter this, what we call, and Frank is also familiar with this term, we enter the scaling up phase. And here the focus changes. So we are turning towards integration. So we have to think about how we leverage the existing assets and capabilities of the core organization, and how do we get it embedded in the business management system, when can we, let's say, embed it there to make sure that it really can compete with the grown-up businesses there. So then this is a critical point. So it doesn't have to be too early, but also not too late. So, and I think dealing with distinct playing fields helps to get this separation straight, this balance straight. So and now let's have a look to key measures that need to be in place from our point of view for separation as well as the integration part. So if we look at the separation, we clearly need to have a dedicated explore environment in place. So, and this organizational setup, how you organize this explore environment, strongly depends on how you define the explore, what the scope is, how far the company aims to reach beyond the current business. So, and on the right-hand side, some of the options, you could think about one standalone exploration unit, which operates on eye level with the business units, and as a completely independent entity, so to speak. Another option would be a kind of competence center that's steered from the top, but is mainly in service of ventures that are driven by businesses. Yeah, and the third part, it's maybe a more loose option, so to speak, is just to recommend a generic process. We call it dual track approach, to give businesses and the entire company a guideline how to go about exploration and exploitation. And as we will see later, here from Eva, Bosch seems to have a kind of combination between the competence center and the recommended process. No matter which option you choose, all of them have to operate on a explore management system, so which is clearly different to a business management system. That means you have to have dedicated metrics, processes, culture, and leadership governance mechanisms in place. And last but not least, explore environment is not just about protecting the venture from the core business. It's also building up an end-to-end competence for exploration. Yeah, and this we call this discovery, validation, scaling up as three distinct competences, and they need to be accommodated in this exploration unit. So they own this competence, and this is very important to improve the learning and to keep it in one hand, so to speak. But a dedicated explore environment doesn't suffice. We also have to make sure that exploratory activities need to be provided with dedicated resources. That means full-time staffing, as it is also the case for greenfield startups. They, let's say, a greenfield startup doesn't deal with part-time employees or so. They work around the clock, so to speak, and the same applies for corporates as well. And one point we also see a lot is that the staffing with the right mindset and skills in the exploratory part is not ideal. So some companies build this dedicated environment for Explorer and dedicated vehicles and programs, etc. But most of the time it's, let's say, exploit workers operating there. And then you have a kind of culture clash or whatever you would call it. So make sure that you staff the exploratory ventures with the right people and the right mindsets. And last but not least, it's about earmarked funding. So specifically for the scaling part, as this is very resource heavy and financially intensive. So what we see is that many companies that are heavily technology driven are willing to spend a lot of money for the technology development, but when it comes to wrapping this new technology in new business models and validate the business potential, they are not willing to spend further money anymore. And this is where many ventures and new business models are struggling. So, and here, earmarked funding definitely helps. When it comes to the integration part, so how do we make it sure that scaling up activities are getting integrated properly with the existing core business? There are, let's say, there are many, but if I would have to boil it down to the two most critical ones, the first is effective governance mechanism. So many successful companies establish a venture board or some council or whatever you would call it that protects resource and guides the ventures along the way, right? And also manage the interplay with the core business with respect to shared objectives, priorities, access to unfair advantage, and all those things. In essence, they also need to make sure, and this relates a little bit to the picture here on the right-hand side. And I borrowed this saying from Tony Sandberg from Scania. He said, bridging the gap between explore and exploit has to be done from both sides. It's not enough to just build the venture. You also have to prepare the core business to, let's say, absorb the venture properly, to let's say, create absorptive capacity to get the venture integrated. So, and this is what an effective governance mechanism can help with. And last but not least, what is often disregarded in companies is the decision on how the proper scaling up setting should look like. So many companies deal with integration into existing business units in a kind of transition process. But there are also other options. You could also manage the venture as a standalone inside the core business or even as a spin out outside the core business. And these different options basically require different approaches and a different way to manage this scaling up process. And the second critical integration measure is ambidextrous leadership. So as you see here on the right side, the exploit system and the explore system are more or less incompatible to each other. Yeah, they do not collaborate. And so you have to account for this. And you have to arbitrate and navigate this interface full of tensions and conflicts. And the most critical roles are here the CXO role. Yeah, most of the time the CEO, him or herself. But let's say, depending on who really owns this corporate innovation topic in the company, and in a more operational role, the head of the actual venture, right? And both of them need to navigate this interface properly, and they need to also know the corporate quite well to accomplish this, right? So, and one critical thing is here, do not avoid tensions and conflicts. That's what many companies try to do by establishing processes and rules and everything. It won't cut it. Yeah, please confront those inherent tensions, make room for them, create a space to exchange and let's say discuss these tensions rather than avoid them. And last but not least, you have to decide to scale up. Yeah, it sounds simple, but many companies don't do this, and they explore into oblivion, right? This Howard Yu from the IMD in Lausanne wrote a great book about that. So, and this is also a leadership issue. You have to decide to scale it up with all consequences, with the decision to put all the resources into it and committing to it over time. So otherwise, you will have a hard time to really grow new businesses with a significant size. So these are the two key measures when it comes to integration. Before we heard the two key measures when it comes to separation. So, and I think taken together, if you address these three questions right and put the key measures in place in your companies, you have a very good start to get ambidexterity implemented in your organization properly. And now, how it looks like at Bosch, how they have put things into practice, and what their learnings are, we will hear now from Eva. Looking forward to this. Over to you, Eva.
Thank you, Ralph. Same question. Can you see my screen? Not sure about that.
Not yet. Still seeing Ralph's screen.
I have to stop it just a second. Yeah. So now.
Okay. Now I will go on. So, just a second. Okay, now it should work.
There we are.
Okay. All right. Thank you, Ralph, again. Hi there, everybody, again. I want to talk a little bit about the topic of ambidexterity and dual innovation, how we deal with that at Bosch. And following a little bit Ralph's logic with the why, how, and what, I'm also going to start with why do we actually need ambidexterity within Bosch. So as you might know, Bosch is a very big, diverse company. We have everything from mobility solutions to heating systems, from power tools to dishwashers. And this big ship is, as I think many hardware-based companies, undergoing a very big transformation, starting with digitalization and all the trends that you know. And we know that to sustain our future, we kind of need new business models, right? We need new business. But we've also learned that this doesn't really happen within the corporate traditional normal structures. You need different mindsets, different processes, different KPIs to actually make new ventures happen. And this is also something that our CEO, our former CEO, Volkmar Denner, recognized when he said, well, we need a core structure with our core business, but at the same time also a space for new ventures to grow. And that is why back in 2015, the Corporate Business Model Innovation Department was founded with the goal to bring business model innovation into the company. But we also had Open Bosch created, which should foster the collaboration between Bosch and startups. And last but not least, there's also the Grow platform, which is an internal incubation platform for new startups to, well, as the name indicates, to grow and to scale. But before I go into the how a little bit more, let me also tell you about the what. What do we understand? Yeah, explore and exploit. First of all, no matter what kind of innovation it is, it always has to be aligned with the strategy, with the strategic search field, and with our strategic direction, both from Bosch or the respective business unit. So strategy and innovation is always closely linked. And then if you see on the right side, exploit for us, rather means incremental innovations, so actually known business models, known customers, but just the development of the core business. And so these kind of innovations can actually happen within the core, within the traditional frame. But on the other hand, we have explore innovations, which we define as really new business models, but not new in the sense of new that you've never seen it before, but new to Bosch or at least new to the business unit. But always thinking about new customers, value propositions. And they can have different homes. It can be arranged in a project house or at the scroll platform that I just mentioned, especially when there's more than one business unit involved. But we also, I have to say, have Explore in the business unit. And these are certainly sometimes closer to the core, at least with the technology side. So an example would be digitalization, right? Digital business models, everyone needs that. And this is also happening in our business units. So how do we actually do that? We at Bosch, we have implemented an innovation process, an end-to-end innovation process called the Bosch Innovation Framework. And this is actually valid all over Bosch and also applied by most of the business unit. And it describes kind of a logical and cost-efficient and de-risking way of how to come to an idea, which is strategically aligned, but then also how to validate and scale it. But also, and that's the most frequent case, how to stop those ideas early. And it contains a lot of known method and tools, but always adapted to our corporate environment. So we cannot use the lean startup, everything by the book. It just doesn't work in such a big corporate environment. So we adapted it to our needs. Plus, behind each phase, from the strategic framing to the scaling, we have KPIs that lie behind. And it's not the traditional KPIs that you might know. So for us, it doesn't make sense to ask, for example, for a business plan or for an ROI when the idea just was created, because this would simply be guessing. You don't even know who your customer is. You just have hypotheses at this point in time. So there are, let's say, phase-based KPIs always adapted to the maturity of the idea. And the beauty of this process is that it is a very extremely efficient, cost-efficient way of an evidence-based way of how to do innovation, because it's really about testing, validating your idea on the market and testing also the whole business model. That's what Ralph said, right? Not only focusing on the technology, but on the whole business model. And it allows us to have a certain comparability along all the innovation projects. So this process works for B2C, for B2B, for ideas in the automotive electronic part, as well as for the power tools department. But as you might know, such an end-to-end process is nice, but it doesn't help at all if you do not have end-to-end capabilities that go with it. And this is why we also introduced some vehicles, innovation vehicles, corporate innovation vehicles, where actually all internal startups can join. It's starting with the strategic search phase on the start, but then we have an adventure program for the creation and for early stage ideas. We have then the Bosch Accelerator program, where you can actually test and validate your idea very quickly. And for those very few ideas that come out of that funnel, the ideas have basically 4 different options to incubate and to scale. I will tell you a little bit more about that in a minute. And a part of those corporate initiatives, we also have specific vehicles and programs that take place in the single business units. So, for example, we at Bosch Engineering have a new business building team that really also supports Explore teams along the BIF, along the Bosch Innovation Framework. So, zooming a little bit in, we have the systematic approach. It allows us to test a lot of ideas in a really structured and evidence-based way. We have created a cost-efficient funnel, and it's basically always based on 2 principles. So the first one is, we know that 90% at least of all startups will fail, right? That's no surprise. So we need to test a lot of ideas to come to the very few ones. And on the other hand, the second principle is that we know that no one can pick winners. So not I can pick winners, you can also not pick winners, and also not the CEO of a company can pick winners, because at the beginning we just don't know if an idea will be successful. We do not have the knowledge of the market or the customer needs. And this is also why we need to test a lot of ideas. And this funnel, as you can see also here by the numbers, allows us to do so. And as I said, in a very logical and cost-efficient way. I have talked now a little bit more about Explore, but the question today is also, how do we manage Explore and Exploit? And here I give you an example of the Bosch Engineering, where I'm currently at. So we differentiate between explore and exploit innovations and use the BIF with its criteria for explore innovations. And we have our, let's say, traditional Bosch Engineering innovation process with certain also exploit, you can say, innovation KPIs. So this is really, let's say, the different types of innovation are also treated differently. But what we also introduced last year is a phase-based funding process on both sides. So not giving them the annual money, but really looking after each phase. Do they meet the criteria? Do they have the evidence? Or do we stop the idea right now? Or do we give them another amount of money to go further? And with that goes also always, as I mentioned before, operative support, such as the new business building team for Explore, and we have innovation managers for the exploit part. But then also coming back to Ralph's question, how do we bridge this? How do we also link both worlds? How do we make sure that an Explore idea then can scale up and hopefully soon become an exploit business? And there I come back to the 4 options that I've just mentioned before, where actually an idea can go and can grow. So you can see a little bit on the color coding, that's how I try to do it, to see what is more of a happy home for an exploit idea and what is more for an explore idea. And coming a little bit closer on this, or having a look at them, well, depending of the proximity of the core and the strategic fit, and also depending on what resources the ideas need, they have 4 different options. And I want to pick out 2 because of the time. I think we have to hurry up maybe a little bit. But for the project house, for example, this is an option which is for projects that are further away from the core, but are promoted heavily from the top management, that usually have a big potential for either Bosch or the business unit, but that also need new processes, new talents, new technology partly, and also in the modern times, also when ecosystems become more and more important, also new partnerships. So Project House is one option, and one example for us would be the solid oxide fuel project. So our hydrogen project was started off as a Project House, and which we hope has a very big potential for Bosch. The other option would be, for example, the Grow platform that I mentioned, also for topics not quite fitting into the daily business, but coming rather bottom up from idea teams who then can join the Grow, also from smaller strategic initiatives. And also those startups, they need kind of own processes and an own space to grow. Otherwise, they would just be drowning in the corporate structures. So yeah, that is basically it. You can business area, and there's also the possibility of a spin-off. I will not go too deep into that because then I think we have time for questions and for a discussion. I hope you could get a short insight on dual innovation, on principles, and how we at Bosch deal with it. And now I think Ralph and I were happy to go into a discussion with you on the how, what, why of ambidexterity and dual innovation.
And why not, and everything else. Okay, thanks, Eva. Thanks, Ralph. Looking at the chat, there is Eugenio posted a link to an ambidextrous leadership from HBR, so you might want to double check the chat. Picking up on the chat, I saw 2 comments, 2 questions that Ralph pay into that overarching identity or vision. There's a quote that someone put down. We, probably the red shirts, right, the day-to-day business, we are paying for your adventures. I interpret this Bora to say this is how the core people think about the explorers. And there was also a debate going on funding that explorative activities when the CEO promised a short payback period. So how do we get this all together, right? It's investing into an area where there are a lot of unknowns, where there might be a big fish out there, a unicorn, but 90% of these startups fail, as we all know. Eva, you mentioned that. How does this work together? The funding, the payback period, the envy, let's put it that way, that the core business might have for the fund life that the innovators are leading.
Yeah, I can take the envy part. I think this relates quite well to what I mentioned in my part with the awareness, well, with the why question, right? So if you don't get this straight, if you don't explain the organization why we have to choose an ambidextrous setup and why there needs to be some collaboration between the explore part and the exploit part. And this is all about stage setting. Then you will get into this envy, into this us versus them thinking. And I think this is exactly what addressing this why question is all about. And this requires effort and a lot of top-down activity in terms of communication, in terms of awareness of the C-level, right? And because this is eventually setting the stage for all the steps subsequently. Maybe you can add something.
Ralph, that means without proper C-level support, it will not work.
Exactly. I mean, you could boil it down to this statement. So there may be some organizations that succeed even in this context, but from my experience, from what I hear from companies, without having the right C-level support and awareness and alignment, you will have a hard time to make organizations truly ambidextrous.
Yeah, maybe adding to that, so I share that. So of course, it's very important to have support from the top, but then also like to maybe avoid this envy that you described, Frank. It's also from my experience, depending on the situation where the company is in, right? If there's a company that's doing very well still, there might be a much bigger envy, but if you are in a company where right now we feel it in every business unit, there needs to be a transformation going on, and we need new business models and we need a new perspective, then that's what we realize. There's also more and more awareness in the core business, in the exploit community, that we actually also need explore business, and that it doesn't really work in the core structures. And we've tried this also a lot. We have a lot of projects that failed because we did it in these structured ways, in the traditional ways. And there are more and more people that are really start thinking differently and say, okay, we need a transformation. We need new types of business models. And that's why I'm supporting also the crazy explore types and
we've got more questions coming in than time left. So if possible, a rather short one actually that relate to Bosch innovation process. One question about the probably early stages, right, where you said quite rightly, in my view, that the KPIs in there would not be fully quantitative because there are too many unknowns in the early stages. So how does Bosch deal with leaps of faith in there? Right, where you say, well, we conducted a couple of interviews, we think that, but we cannot fully prove it. And the other question relates to the end of the journey, to the handover to the operational units then. Could you elaborate more on what is going on there?
Okay, so first of all, with the more qualitative KPIs at the beginning, it definitely has to do with a strong awareness education training everywhere you are presenting your idea. So it has to do, so what we do is a lot of business model training, management training, to get this right on the management side, who then actually listen to your idea, to tell them or to teach them also, hey, look, explore innovations is different, and you have to deal with different KPIs at the beginning. So a lot is just telling the story all over again and doing really like management trainings on a regular basis. That's what we are doing very strongly. And then also what we see is also this qualitative evidence can be persuading, right? Because what we are doing, what we have included in the KPIs is always a strong feedback from the market, always what we get from the customers. And you said, Frank, for example, a couple of interviews. Well, for us, it's at least 100 customer interviews, and this makes also a strong evidence-based a way of confirming your idea or not confirming your idea. So I would say it's those two factors. And then elaborating more on the incubation, the scaling part. Depends on where I start. So I showed you those 4 options that actually exist within Bosch. So you can grow in a business unit. There is a project house, a spin-off, or you can also use the Scroll platform. But what especially maybe is important, what we have learned during our journey is at the beginning when we were in this validation phase, and we saw a lot of teams not really succeeding afterwards in the incubation. We kind of, in the validation phase, left them alone with finding their happy home. And then they came out of the validation phase and thought, okay, what are we going to do? Where is my happy home? And they simply failed. So what we are doing now is integrating this happy home thought much earlier in the process. Having within the validation, one KPI, when we're talking about KPIs, is do you have already an internal strong stakeholder management? Do you already have an internal happy home, or what are your plans you would go afterwards? What option do you have? What option do you choose? Because if you do not have one within the validation, it will be very hard for you to scale afterwards. So a little bit this preparation for incubation in the validation is kind of essential for our teams.
Okay, we're getting closer to the end of our time box. I've got a couple of more questions, but please, to the audience, if you look up in the chat, you find the 3 reflective questions. Please fill this out to feed what's going on in the unconference wall. 3 questions saying what was new to you, what was reinforced, and where would you like to dig deeper. Question to both of you, while the audience please work on these 3 questions from Sarah. Sarah says, even with strong C-level support, it seems to me that many ideas live or die with middle management once you transition from explore to exploit. What has been your experience with this, Ralph and Eva? Do you have any tips? Please try to keep it short. Ralph, you go first.
Just briefly, I think the awareness of top management is just the first step. You have to disseminate these priorities so this means that the C-level really have to own the strategy and the implementation, and has to make sure that the whole organization is aligned or is going to be aligned accordingly. And this also includes the middle management in terms of priorities, objectives, incentivization, etc., etc. But it needs to disseminate from the top down. So I think this is the point.
Eva, maybe some experiences at Bosch when the transition at the end of the journey takes place, how to avoid that not invented here, that middle management reject what has been produced.
Yeah, I come back a little bit to the validation part where we started to include that thought too, because what we are doing is we're always having mentors from that middle management, kind of going along the journey with the startup. So this is what we do very early, to always include the middle management, and they then feel kind of responsible. We also give them trainings. By the way, education, in my opinion, is a very important vehicle. And this worked quite well because all of the startups really have someone from the middle and also someone from the top management as a mentor, as also always surveying and accompanying the team during the process, and these are also the ones who then can fight for the team when it comes more into the scaling phase. These are all
Let me ask you very tangible, Eva. If there is a transition at the end of the journey, right, from that explore that has been scaled up into an existing business unit, at Bosch, do the middle manager have KPIs that incentivize them to absorb it and take it from there?
Thank you, Frank. That would actually be the second part of my answer.
Sorry.
No, that's fine. It's fine because I would have forgotten it. So it's good. Thank you for that. There is partly, yeah. So I think we can still be stronger at this. But for example, we have a program which is incentivizing and encouraging ARR business, which is called annual recurring revenue business. And actually also middle management, also business units have certain incentives to go on with those kind of business models. And there are also innovation funding for those kind of projects. There are EBIT reliefs. So there are also free coaching for those kind of business model in teams. And this is something which is very effective, and also the middle management having the support for the new teams.
Mm-hmm. Okay, before I come to my final question, once again to the audience, please hit that link that was provided for the reflective questions. Now, Eva, Ralph, if the audience wants to learn more, and I often hear, what are case studies that we can draw insights from? Which companies, in your view, would be a good stop to have a look at it, how they do ambidexterity? Who do you see as a kind of quote-unquote benchmarks in running ambidexterity?
Clearly Bosch.
Obviously.
No, really. I would say, of course, Frank BP is a very worthwhile story. I think they have many of the measures in place we were talking about. DMS is an interesting company in that regard. And also Scania, I've been working with them for a couple of months. They take a different approach, but very interesting journey. And so they are all also worth considering.
Mm-hmm. And Eva, what inspired you outside of Bosch, obviously? Which company?
So last week, for example, I was at the Innovation Conference, and there was also, as Ralph said, a BP discussion and a presentation. So this is also where we, what I find inspiring, and also where we can exchange on topics, which is, for example, a good way. Also, what we always have interesting discussions with is more of our also local energy providers, for example, because they really have a need to invent themselves. So we have very interesting discussions with them about explore, exploit, and how we manage that. It's always those industries really have a need right now.
So closing that session again to the both of you, what would be your one-liner, the piece of advice that you can give in an elevator pitch to make ambidexterity work? Just a one-liner, Ralph, not 20 slides.
Address those 3 questions.
Okay. Eva?
That's very good. I cannot top this. So I would say educate throughout the company, and then end-to-end process and capabilities.
Okay. So thank you very much, Eva, ladies first, and Ralph, for being with us. The discussion goes on, right? That's why we're having this Unconference. We have those open spaces. We have peer circles out there. The reflective questions will be put on the Unconference wall. I guess you're familiar with the process now. So please reach out to Ralph and Eva in these spaces to learn more, to sharpen your thinking. Thanks for being with us. Thanks again, Eva. Thanks again, Ralph. Hope to see you soon. Goodbye.
Thanks for a great moderation, Frank. And just one thing, I would like to invite the audience to post their questions in case we couldn't answer them. Just post it on the platform, and we will take care of that. So if you want.
Super. Anything more to add, Eva, from your side?
No, same. You can always contact us via various channels if you have still more questions.
Super. Then let's make ambidexterity right, implement it, starting now after this great talk. Thanks a lot. Have a good day.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you all. Bye.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.